Christopher Nolan may have built real ships, filmed on real oceans, and spent hundreds of millions bringing the ancient world to life. But at the center of it all, you've somehow got Cedric Diggory, Spider-Man, Andrea Sachs, Jason Bourne, and a rapper crossing over into the same universe. And unfortunately, that's only the beginning of the problem. Hey everyone, welcome to Mythology Explained. Over the last couple of months, I've made quite a few videos discussing Christopher Nolan's upcoming adaptation of The Odyssey. I've talked about casting, the apparent lack of Greek representation in one of the most famous Greek stories ever written, Lupita Nyong'o playing Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra, the rumours that Elliot Page might be playing Achilles, and more recently, I took a look at Emily Wilson's translation of The Odyssey, which Christopher Nolan has mentioned on multiple occasions. And now the final trailer has officially dropped. And rather than clearing things up, it seems to have made the controversy surrounding this movie significantly worse. Because this was supposed to be the trailer that brought everything together. Up until now, people had been reacting purely to casting announcements, set photos, rumors, teaser trailers, and individual images taken completely out of context. And of course, there's only so much you can really judge from that. Maybe the unusual casting choices would make more sense once we saw everyone in the world of the film. Maybe the strange armor would look better in motion. But now that we've seen the final trailer, I don't necessarily think that's happened, and based on the reaction online, I'm clearly not the only one. The trailer has received an extremely negative response on YouTube, at least according to the available dislike estimates. The comment section is filled with people criticizing the casting, the dialogue, the costumes, the historical inaccuracies, and the overall visual direction of the film. And just to be clear here, YouTube dislikes are no longer publicly visible without third-party tools, so I'm not going to treat any exact number as completely definitive. And of course this is most surprising because this is Christopher Nolan we're talking about here, the director of Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, and Oppenheimer, a filmmaker with one of the most passionate audiences in the entire industry. So the fact that one of his trailers is receiving this kind of reaction is pretty significant. The question now being asked is whether The Odyssey can actually underperform. Christopher Nolan has an enormous following, and the film has one of the most star-studded casts ever assembled. It's also based on one of the most famous stories in human history. But I also think something has clearly gone wrong with the way audiences are responding to it, and the final trailer makes it easier to understand why. To keep things light momentarily, let's start on a positive note. There's clearly some effort put in as far as set design, lighting, etc. Some of the visual effects look phenomenal, and I'm sure in typical Christopher Nolan fashion, we won't be able to hear a word of dialogue over the barrage of sound effects. The scale is probably the most impressive thing about it. The ships appear to be real, the locations are real, the armies are large, the oceans look dangerous, and the entire production has the kind of physical presence that Christopher Nolan is known for. But unfortunately, the trailer also reinforces almost every major concern people already had about the movie. The first one being that, despite all of the effort Nolan's putting into making this world feel physically real, it still doesn't really feel Greek. I know I've already discussed this in previous videos, but the final trailer makes it more noticeable. We have real ships, real locations, and massive sets. But then at the center of all of it is a cast that feels like it was assembled almost entirely based on Hollywood star power. Matt Damon, Tom Holland, Zendaya, Anne Hathaway, Robert Pattinson, Charlize Theron, Travis Scott. Now, individually, many of these people are obviously extremely talented, but when you put them all together, the movie starts to feel a bit like a giant Hollywood costume party. Like Cedric Diggory, Spider-Man, Andrea Sachs, and Jason Bourne somehow all crossed over into the same universe. Now, I don't expect every actor to be born in Greece. That has never been my argument. The Odyssey has been translated and adapted by people all over the world for thousands of years. It's one of the foundational works of Western literature, and at this point it belongs to everyone. But it still comes from somewhere. It's still a Greek story, and the fact that there appears to be so little Greek presence in the film's major cast is difficult to ignore. Casting is part of world building. The people are part of the world. You can't spend hundreds of millions of dollars making sure the ocean looks real, then act as though the human presence at the center of the film is somehow separate from authenticity. And the trailer makes that disconnect even more noticeable, because the film itself appears to be taking everything so seriously. Nolan seems to want us to believe that we are watching a grounded version of the ancient world, but the more grounded everything becomes, the stranger some of these casting decisions feel. And then of course we have Helen of Troy. Lupita Nyong'o has been confirmed as Helen of Troy, and apparently also Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon and sister of Helen herself. In Greek mythology, Clytemnestra is one of the most infamous and tragic figures in the entire Trojan War cycle. Helen becomes the woman whose departure helps begin the war. Clytemnestra becomes the woman who murders Agamemnon when he finally returns from it. But the problem is that the casting has already become one of the biggest distractions surrounding the movie. Helen isn't just some minor figure, she's Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, one of the most famous women in all of mythology. And while Homer doesn't give us a modern police sketch description of her appearance, she has still been imagined and portrayed within Greek and European artistic tradition for thousands of years. So naturally, audiences are going to have an image in their heads. And once again, the issue isn't simply that Lupita Nyong'o looks different from one particular painting. It's whether the character feels like she naturally belongs in the world Nolan has created. And based on the trailer, I'm still not convinced that she does. The other problem is some of the language being used around the film. In an interview discussing the Odyssey, Nyong'o pointed out that very little of the poem is told from the perspective of women, which is true. The Odyssey is an ancient epic focused primarily on Odysseus, Telemachus, and the male heroic world surrounding them. But she then jokingly framed the issue as though someone needed to ask Homer why he didn't give the women more screen time. And obviously it was a joke, but I think it reveals something about the approach being taken here, because the concern is no longer just that Nolan is adapting the Odyssey, it's that the film may feel like it is attempting to correct the Odyssey, to look at the poem through a completely modern moral lens and identify the things that need to be updated, fixed, expanded, or rebalanced for a modern audience. And that connects directly to the Emily Wilson conversation. To be clear here, Wilson's translation is not some fake or completely illegitimate version of Homer. She is obviously a serious classicist, and some of her choices are completely defensible. Her decision to refer more directly to slavery, for example, reveals things that older translations softened or obscured, and whether that needed to be done at all is another question entirely. But I also think some of the defense surrounding her translation goes way too far. Not every controversial choice can simply be dismissed as Wilson correcting the biases of older male translators. Her Odyssey is very modern, direct, and deeply interested in slavery, gender, power, hierarchy, and the people usually pushed into the background of heroic literature. And while sometimes that exposes things already present in Homer, at other times it feels like Wilson is pushing the poem toward a very specific modern interpretation. And I don't think it's the job of a translator to make the ancient story clearer while constantly telling the reader how to morally interpret it. But she is just a person, and she's certainly entitled to her own perspective. Homer is often ambiguous, and the poem doesn't always pause to condemn the things that a modern audience would condemn. Wilson's translation can sometimes reduce that ambiguity by making certain power dynamics, moral judgments, and psychological readings much more explicit than they are in the original. And when you combine that kind of interpretation with Nolan's casting, the modern dialogue, it becomes reasonable to wonder whether the film is simply adapting Homer or actively reshaping Homer to align with modern expectations. And at that point, the question is no longer just how much of the story Nolan is changing, it's how much of Homer's ancient worldview is actually going to survive. The poem is not simply a modern family drama that happens to contain a Cyclops. It comes from a culture with a completely different understanding of honor, hospitality, marriage, revenge, loyalty, and justice. And if Nolan attempts to make every character behave according to modern expectations, then the movie may end up looking ancient while feeling completely contemporary. That is probably my biggest concern after seeing the final trailer. This is supposed to be the great Greek story about the importance of returning to the place where you belong, and yet the film adapting it appears to treat Greek identity as one of the least important parts of the production. After the final trailer dropped, the backlash no longer seems to be centered around one rumored casting choice. It's no longer just Elliot Page possibly playing Achilles, which isn't happening by the way, or Lupita Nyong'o playing Helen. People are now reacting to the complete package. and the complete package has left a lot of viewers feeling that something is off. Christopher Nolan appears to have spent an unbelievable amount of money recreating the physical world of the Odyssey, while simultaneously changing many of the things that gave that world its identity. And that's it for today's video. I'd like to hear what you all thought about the trailer, so please do let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more Mythology Explained. See you in the next one.